Why do you think he would be a better president than Muhammadu Buhari?
Because I see such obvious failings. I see a leadership that is steeped in the past, that has refused to evolve with a nation that is predominantly a nation of young, aspiring people and still doing things the way they were done many, many years ago and did not work. I think our leadership in the country today is totally out of tune with the current realities of our nation. There's a disconnect somewhere. And so when you have a leadership that blames its young people, for instance, of not striving enough, of being lazy, it's a disconnect because the tools to make them achieve their aspirations has not been provided. You look at the state of education. The state of education today is a far cry from what I received. So the elites amongst us try to send their children abroad. That's a drain. You're gonna breed a generation of children who are disconnected from home and from abroad. We had good schools here that could compete with schools anywhere in the world. We had some of the best medical facilities in the 60s and early 70s. All that has gone to rot. The president himself receives medical treatment abroad. That is a sad state of affairs. And so we can't go on this way and keep on complaining. Someone has to take the bull by the horns, and I intend to do that.
Where do you see the major failures of the current administration?
They were not prepared for leadership. I'll give a simple example. 6 months to set up a cabinet? Where do you hear that? President Buhari campaigned for office on 2 planks, corruption and security. Now let's take the scorecard. Corruption has not ebbed. Persecuting corruption is dealing with symptoms and not the problem. The real problem is you've got to create jobs for people. You've got to pay them adequately. You've got to strengthen your institutions that make it almost impossible for you to engage in this sort of activity. And should you engage in it, you're sure that there are consequences. I could reduce Nigeria's problem overall to one word: consequences, and the lack of it. People get away with anything. And so it's not picking a few, largely in the opposition, right, and name and shame them in the press. Then thereafter nothing happens. And they have found a way of now, declaring for the party in government, and everything peters down. That's one. Security, where are we? Despite the fact that the government has on 2 or 3 occasions announced that the war is over and Boko Haram has been defeated, we know it has not been defeated. It's still reigning supreme in the northeast. There's still suicide bombings and kidnaps and all that. And if you visit any of the IDPs, you would appreciate that we are breeding the next generation of very disgruntled people.
So if you were elected president, what would your priorities be then?
Creating jobs.
How can you do that? I mean, that's what every
boom
potential
the economy.
president says.
Boom the economy. Look, I'll take 2 items, 2 simple items. First of all, you can't grow your economy with the type of banking system that you run, where the interest rate regime is in the upper 20s. You need to have affordable credits. And that would enable the small and medium-scale businessmen borrow and expand their businesses. Thousands of businesses have closed down because they can't afford the interest rate regime that is currently going on, right? And this is self-inflicted. Nigeria grew faster when we had some form of regulation on interest rates. And the interest rates were in the single digits. Our economy did a lot more better than it is doing today. The second thing is this: you've got to grow this economy at least 15% annually for 10 years to recalibrate the system. Nigeria ought to be a $2.5 trillion economy, not a $300 or $400 billion economy. Here you are flaring about 2 to 2.5 billion cubic feet of gas daily, and we've done this for over 30 years. That's equivalent to about 25 million liters of diesel that we burn on a daily basis. Now, all you need to do is clean up that gas, have a network, pipe it throughout the length and breadth of this country, and make it available to industry. That would free electricity on the national grid for residential and domestic use, but let the industries, particularly the big energy consumers, be on gas. And hey, you are flaring the gas. Give the gas for next to nothing. You can give it up for free because you are flaring it anyway. That would be our subsidy to industry. That would catalyze growth in the economy. That will create jobs for folks. That would pay itself back because your return, taxable return, will be much higher than it is today. We import literally everything. We need to substitute. The things we can make here, we make them here, but that would only happen if you have affordable credit and energy and, of course, the right policies.
Now, when you were governor in Cross River State, it was also one of your priorities to strengthen the economy, and you were widely seen as somebody who created the tourism industry here, for example. But on the other hand, there were also like big projects like the Tilapa Free Trade Zone, for example, where about $500 million were invested into like huge film studios, luxury shopping malls, and so on. But if you go there today, it's a ghost town. It's almost an abandoned white elephant. If you see projects like this that started under your administration, why would you say then Nigerians would trust you in handling their finances?
Tinapa is sadly a failure of continuity. You start a race. You hand the baton over to the next fellow. He ought to continue the race. Running a country or state is upbuilding. You're not going to start the construction from foundation to rooftop. You may get to the first or second floor and hand over to the next fellow. And if the next fellow decides that he wants to start a completely new building and abandon what he met on ground, you would never finish construction. And I'm sure my successor is also facing the same realities because there's a plethora of abandoned projects of his that are not being continued. And this is what you find throughout the length and breadth of our country. And this is a collective failure in leadership.
There were reports that you bought real estate in Lagos a couple of years ago worth more than $2 million. Is that right, first of all? And if it is right, may I ask you what's the source of your wealth is?
I've heard that story. No, it's wrong. There's an apartment building that was developed and it was funded by the banks, and the records are there. And just because I've been a governor doesn't mean I shouldn't fund it. The property itself, the land itself was acquired well before I became governor anyway.
There are also reports that before you became governor, that you were also in the business of rice importation. That's
My wife was the sole representative for Uncle Ben's. It's an American brand for all of West Africa.
But you personally didn't have anything to do with the...
No, but my wife is involved. I'm involved. But it was her business.
So how do you see measures by the government then, by President Buhari, who's banning imports?
Absolutely. We shouldn't import what we can easily provide. We're a developing economy. We need to create jobs. Importing rice is just creating jobs overseas at the expense of our people.
Then why did your family engage in that?
Because at the time, there was no rice production going on, and I wasn't in government. Actually, we stopped the importation not long after we got into government. It was not a sustainable thing.
The issue of Biafra has been coming up again and again over the past month, with some groups and individuals calling for a state of Biafra again. What is your personal opinion on that?
I don't believe in that. I think that is a dream that belongs to another generation, and that generation has since absorbed itself of that dream. There's strength in our union. The important thing is make the union work. Structure the union such that it's not held back in its development.
More moderate voices are calling for restructuring, for changing the system at least, so people in the area could benefit more of a new system. What's your thought on that idea?
I don't know why we're worried about restructuring when some people get very nervous when they hear about it. Adrian, you restructure yourself every day. You wake up and say, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to change this, I'm going to do this better than I did yesterday. That's restructuring. Corporate organizations restructure. If you don't restructure constantly, you will stagnate, and when you stagnate, you retrogress, and when you retrogress, you will eventually eclipse. So I believe we ought to restructure. It's not the first time. We started this nation as 3 regions, federating units. Then we had the Civil War, and it was restructured to 12 states, then eventually 19 and 21, and then 27 and 36 or whatever. We moved our capital. We shouldn't be afraid of it. I think the kernel of the fear for restructuring is revenue distribution.
So are you saying that state governments shouldn't receive oil revenues then, for example? Because that's the way how it works right now.
You know, my plan in Cross River was to develop 2 industries, agriculture and tourism. If there were consistency in plan, by the year 2012, I don't think we would have required resources from the federal government. If Cross River could do it, and we were well on the way to doing it, every state can do something. You just have to do a SWOT analysis and determine where your strengths and weaknesses are and focus on developing your comparative advantage.